There's sheets too. Did you get sheets? Right where Don is? You need a sheet. You don't have to. That's maybe for take home for you.
Right next to Don.
I wasn't paying attention. I'll let you.
Is Gary, you want to do it?
I would.
Isn't it on your phone?
So this is
Another one or not?
the kingdom
That would be nice.
of Israel under Solomon and David. This is the high point of the kingdom of Israel. This had reached its highest point, and if you look at it, you see that it not only encompasses modern day Israel, but much of modern day Jordan, much of Syria, and parts of Egypt. So it was huge. To set the stage for that, though, we need to understand the early civilizations in the Middle East. At that time, you had Babylonia, modern-day Iraq, in the lower right-hand side, Egypt, lower left, Mitanni, which is part of the northern Iraq, and then into Turkey, you have the Hittites. And these were the main ancient civilizations. But what happened, which was really important to understanding this history, is there was this so-called empty period of history. Both Egypt and Iraq, the Mesopotamian area where you had civilization start. According to historians, the worst disaster in ancient history, even more calamitous than the collapse of the Roman Western Empire.
Did that have anything to do with the Red Sea?
Not sure. There just was this great decline.
You know, that they lost their whole army.
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, that wouldn't necessarily have been, this would actually have been maybe a little before that. But what we see here is invasions from all over, fighting. There's also a lot of earthquakes, but what you have is you see here all the different groups, especially this group of people coming from the western Mediterranean, the so-called sea peoples. And we have it recorded, especially in the Egyptians, how the sea people came in and conquered much. This is about the time where there had been a decline that allowed the Israelites to leave Egypt and go into the Promised Land. It's also believed that some of those sea people are the so-called Philistines. And the reason why it's so traumatic, according to historians, the way they tell ancient times is by technology, and that technology is mainly by the type of tools they use. So prehistory is called the Stone Age. And then the opening history is called the Copper Age. And then these great ancient empires called the Bronze Age. What do you think happened after that? After bronze? Iron. And the sea peoples are the ones who introduced that. The reason why the Philistines were so feared is because of that technological advantage they had. In two areas. What's the advantage of iron over bronze? Two areas. One might be very obvious. Fighting. What's the other area? Agriculture.
Tilling?
Yeah, agriculture. Much improved farming. And then this is the period between the Bronze and Iron Ages. Now, in terms of the big picture, what does this mean? It means God is using history to bring about his plan of salvation.
Oh, don't say the word. Don't say
And I can't get anything out of this.
You're bad.
No. You'll have to do it for me, Norm. Next one. Norm, the next one.
Norm's stuck too.
Here it goes.
You got it, Norm? Can you hear me, Norm?
Not really with the doors. Not really, probably.
Okay, I think I got it now.
Okay. Don't worry about it. one. All right, let's read together here from 2 Samuel 8 about this. The time of David. Let's read. In the course of time, David defeated the Philistines and subdued them. And he took Metheg-Ammah from the control of the Philistines. David also defeated the Moabites. He made them lie down on the ground and measured them off with the length of cord. Every 2 lengths of them were put to death, and the third length was allowed to live. So the Moabites became subject to David and brought him tribute. Next. Moreover, David defeated Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah, when he went to restore his monument at the Euphrates River. David captured 1,000 of his chariots, 70,000 charioteers, and 20,000 foot soldiers. He hamstrung all but 100 of the chariot horses. All right? And there you see, this is Zobah up there being conquered by David. Next. Next, Norm. When the armies in Damascus came to help Hadadezer, king of Zobah, there's 2,000 of them. Next. Next. He put garrisons in the Aramean kingdom of Damascus, and the Arameans became subject to him and brought up tribute. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. Next. David took the gold shields that belonged to the officers of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. Next. From Teba and Boratai, towns that belonged to Hadadezer, King David took a great quantity of bronze. Next. When king of Hamath heard that David had defeated the entire Hadadezer, next, he sent his son Joram to King David to greet him and congratulate him on his victory in the battle over Hadadezer, who had been in war with him. Joram brought with him articles of silver, gold, and of bronze. Next, King David dedicated these articles to the Lord as he had done with the gold and silver from all the nations he had subdued. All right? And here you see the defeat of what we call them today Syrians. It's really Arameans, because Syria is really kind of a mispronunciation. That's really Assyria, which is modern day Iraq, but this is modern day Syria, which back then was Arab. So here you see David defeating, and notice what David did with the treasures.
He dedicated to the
Yeah, he gave to God. Where a lot of the people got in trouble because they keep for themselves. Next rank. Edom and Moab, the Ammonites, the Philistines, and Amalek. He also dedicated the water taken from Hadadezer, son of Rehob, king of Zobah. All right, you see the different areas: Ammon, Amalek, and especially the Philistine. All right, David subduing all these. And how is David able to do that? Well, what did David gain from the Philistines? Remember, he had been on the run from King Saul, right?
Actually hid out with them for a while.
He hid out with them.
Yeah.
One way he did it is he pretended to be crazy.
Yeah.
And another way he did it is he said he was helping them because he would fight their enemies except the Israelites. And so he learned their technology and passed it on to the Israelites. And the Israelites became much stronger. God's helping them, and they defeated all these enemies. Which means by the time of the end of David's realm, what has happened that hadn't happened since the very beginning, when they came into the land under Joshua.
It's all kind of united again.
And that means there's what the hadn't been. Else, peace. They're basically warring, except for these brief times where the judges, settled down, but there's really otherwise constant warring going on since they first came there hundreds of years ago under Joshua. Next, and David became famous after he returned from striking down 18,000 Edomites in the valley of Salt. Next, he put garrisons around Edom, and all the Edomites came subject to David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. Next, all right, there's Edomites, defeated them. All right, next. So what's happened? All these enemies have been defeated. There's prosperity. Now, one of the reasons why this also happens, God in the big picture, is he has historically allows this exodus of the people, this establishment and the heightening of it with David during this period of the collapse of the civilization. It happened before or after that. That could have, by God's grace, yes, but God uses the history to cause a period of time where these big superpowers, like in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Hittites in the north, aren't coming through and conquering the area. It's a time, since these great empires are weakened, where the people of Israel can actually travel there, build up, and prosper. All part of God's plan. Because here he put the people in the Holy Land under Abraham. But they don't stay there. Why don't they? What happens to the famine? The famine. Well, why does God do that? Well, two things happen. One, they are not swallowed up by these big empires that come in there. Instead, what happens to them? They go to Egypt. What happens in Egypt?
They multiply.
Why are they able to multiply?
Well, it's hard work, but there's good food.
Yeah. Egypt, because of the flooding of the Nile, it's the best agriculture around there, and you can have far more people live there. If you look at even today, the Middle East, and the population of this area, if you take the population of most of that area, except for Turkey up there, you take the population there, it's still far less than the population of people around the Nile Valley. Cairo is one of the biggest cities, population-wise, in the world, because of the Nile. They can expand in a way and grow, even though they eventually become slaves, but they still grow in great numbers because they're in a place where what happens? You have constant rain. You don't have to worry about rain, you have constant flooding. And Egypt is so bountiful that way that it not only feeds all of its population, but during the height of the Roman Empire, if you lived in Rome, the bread you ate, the flour came from where? Egypt. Next. 1 Kings 9. Now we get to Solomon. At the end of 20 years during which Solomon built these two buildings, the temple of the Lord and the royal palace, King Solomon gave 20 towns in Galilee to Hiram, king of Tyre, because Hiram had supplied him with all the cedar and juniper and gold he wanted. Okay, there's Phoenicia, which is modern-day Lebanon. Phoenicia is slammed against the ocean. You have these high mountains and ocean. Not great for farming, but what is it good for? Trees. Trees for what? Building ships. Great natural harbors. They're the great seafarers of the ancient world. Next. Okay, and you see modern-day Lebanon, Phoenicia again. And you see where Tyre is located there in black, which is the most prominent city in Phoenicia. Next. There's the picture of Tyre. It is an island. Originally, it was an island where it had walls and protected it, and it was hard to conquer because it controlled the navy. It was finally conquered by Alexander the Great, and he did it by building a causeway, which is why today you go to Tyre, it's no longer an island. It's connected by the causeway. Continue. All right. What were the cedar and gold used for?
For the temple?
That's what the temple was for. Because you didn't have those kind of big trees. You had trees, scrub trees around Jerusalem, but not the big trees for building, and you didn't have the gold. So through that, Solomon had the material. But there's a typical tree in Palestine. Maybe it's shaped that way, but it's hard to build a lot of lumber out of anything big. But this is the kind of trees that you would have in Lebanon, the famous cedars of Lebanon, the tallest, straightest trees in the world at that time. Now, today you go to Lebanon, you see them. How many do you see? Just a little bit here or there, and they're only there because they're preserved by the national government. It used to be the hills that were just covered with cedars, but over the years, the ancient, they were all cut down for building. When Hiram went from Tyre to see the towns that Solomon had given, he was not pleased with them. What kind of towns are these that you've given me, my brother? He asked.
He
And
called
the
the
land
land
a couple, a name that they had to this day. Now Hiram had set the king 120 talents of gold. All right, a talent is the heaviest measure in the Bible, it's 75 pounds. Now, considering the gold is what? $405,000 an ounce, and you multiply that by 16, which is how many ounces there are in a pound. So you see what's worth in today's cost. Well, that was back then, and now you see, okay, yeah, you take 100 steaks and you multiply it by the number of pounds they had, you see the extensive amount of cost that was. Okay, next. Here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple,
his own palace, the terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and kings are Megiddo and Giza.
Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had attacked and captured Gaza.
He had set it on fire. He killed its Canaanite inhabitants
And then gave it as a wedding gift to his daughter, Solomon's wife. And Solomon rebuilt Gaza. He built up the lower Beth-horon, Baalath, Tadmor, and the desert within his land, as well as his 4 cities, the towns for his chariots, and for his horses, wherever he desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and throughout all the territory where he ruled. Okay, horses and chariots. Why have that? Why is that an important thing to have? Why the chariots? In Solomon's time, could you ride a horse like we do today? Why not? Why not? What didn't they have at that time? Saddle, but even more important than saddle is at the bottom of the saddle. Stirrups. You think of the Native Americans who learned to ride their horses without that kind of technology. Very, very took a lot of skill to do that. The people in the ancient world didn't do it that way because they didn't use horses that way. They used them to carry chariots. So the chariot was the most feared thing. And it was later on barbarian people, uncivilized people, who learned to ride first like the Native Americans, and then developed the stirrup, who became the great military. They're just starting at this point. So at this point, your main use of chariot is to use it for chariots. And then why horses? I didn't just use regular horses. Next, right? Oh, before that, go back. Yeah, this one. Civil War. In the Civil War, both the North and the South had cavalry. At the beginning of the war, who had by far the best cavalry?
The South.
Why?
Because they were used to riding horses?
Yes, yes. And not only were they used to riding horses, what kind of horses did they ride?
Fast horses.
Yes. And when they went in, you had the rich people who, especially were the cavalry officers, cavalry soldiers. They had their own horses, and they were riding horses. In the North, what did they have?
Plow horses.
They had draft horses, great for pulling wagons, but you can't use them as cavalry. So at the beginning of the war, the South dominated. As the war went on, it switched. Why? If you were a cavalryman in the Confederate Army, who supplied you with your horse? You did. Once your horse got killed or wounded or worn out, you were stuck. You had to find someone else. Whereas, who supplied the Union Army with their horses?
The government.
The government. And at first, it was terrible, but they had some officers come in and clean up the system and start providing better and better horses. So as the war went on, it switched where the North started to have the better horses because they had time to breeding them and selecting them. And since the government was providing it, even though you lost, you had someone to replace it, the South did.
The North used those draft horses to pull their cannon and stuff around. The South, they had to almost do it by hand.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, if you're going to have active cavalry like that, what does it help? It helps to have animals ready and bred to do that, rather than just taking them off the farm. So by setting up these stables, what is Solomon doing? He's setting up a ready unit of force that can be deployed right away. And the result of that is, of course, a lot of the peace they had. Okay? Let's read. There were still left Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These people were not Israelites. Continue. What was supposed to happen to these people? Let's read Deuteronomy 20. Next. However, the cities of the nations the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance, do not legalize anything that breeds. Completely destroy them. Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded. So we're to Moses, the people, before they go into the promised land. Do they fulfill these words?
No.
No. That sounds awful, harsh, and cruel to them. But why did God give that command?
Because he wanted his people to worship him.
Yes.
And
And
these people had all sorts of
right,
gods.
he wanted to destroy the evil, the paganism. And they didn't follow his command. What happens? They got into trouble. And it continued on. Even now, later on, Solomon's time, it's still a problem. Even though it doesn't seem to be, because under David and Solomon, it's a big empire. Next. First Kings, yeah. Let's read. Solomon conscripted all the descendants of all these peoples remaining in the land, whose the Israelites could not exterminate, to serve as slave labor, as it is to this day. But Solomon did not make slaves of any of the Israelites. They were his fighting men, his government officials, his officers, his captains, and the commanders of his chariots and charioteers. They were also the chief officials in charge of Solomon's project, 550 officials supervised those who did work. After Pharaoh's daughter had come up from the city of David to the palace Solomon had built for him, he constructed the terraces. 3 times a year, Solomon sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings on the altar he built for the Lord, burning incense before the Lord among them, who so fulfilled the temple obligations. King Solomon also built ships at Ezion-Geber, which is near Elath and Edom, on the shore of the Red Sea. All right. Here are the ancient trade routes in the Indian Ocean area in the Middle East. This is where most of the big trade came, because you have places like India and China. This is what connected them and their ancient empires with the Middle East. And that's where the Red Sea is so important, because it mostly comes through that way, through the Red Sea. And at the very next frame, Hiram set his men, sailors who knew the sea. You go back, forward. To serve the fleet with Solomon's men. Continue. They sailed over and brought back 420 pounds of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. Okay, there again the talent, how much it is. Next. Tel Quasili. This is a place where they uncovered the wealth that comes from the area. Next. And it talks about the gold from Ophir to Bet-Horon, 30 shekels. So Ophir is believed to be from this someplace in the south of the Red Sea. Next. It could be that. It could also be India. It could be Sri Lanka, Malaysia, Afar, Africa, Arabia. We're not sure. But the point is, this trade happens, next frame. No, that's not the one I want. It happens because at the very tip of Israel, you have this Elath that was common, which later be known as Aqaba. It is the only point of Israel that touches the Red Sea. So that means that Israel can trade with that area. And Solomon builds it up, and that's what really gains the wealth. And now a part of the trade that goes from all the way to China, India, to the Near East. And this is one of the most important places in the nation of Israel to this day. You get this one port, this one point where Israel touches the Red Sea. It's important for their commerce and so forth. And this really helps to build up the wealth. 1 Kings 10, now we get to the Queen of Sheba. When the Queen of Sheba heard about the fame of Solomon and his relationship to the Lord, she came to test Solomon with hard questions. Arriving in Jerusalem with a caravan, camels carrying spices, large quantities of gold, and precious stones, she came to Solomon to talk with him about all she had in her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. Nothing was too hard for King to explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba saw the wisdom of Solomon, and the palace he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his officials, the attending servants in their robes, his cupbearers, burnt offerings he made in the temple of the Lord, she was overwhelmed. She said to the king, The report I heard in my own country about your achievements
and your wisdom
is true. But I now believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your people must be. How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom. Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed on you the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness. So, what is the significance of this queen coming to visit Solomon? What's the significance? You hear her words at the end. What she said here.
She sees what the Lord has done through Solomon.
Almost seemed to be acknowledging his God.
I mean, yeah, she admits that Solomon had help. I mean, she's obviously pagan, right? Pagan.
Okay, now as a pagan, do you have any problem really admitting that there's a God of Israel? No, that's what pagans are about. You have all gods. Every god, every church, every area has its own God. And just admit that, yeah, they have a God. But there becomes this sense that there's something special about this God. When else do we see that happening? Earlier in the Old Testament history. You have this big thing with Solomon and David, the expansion. What's the other big event that takes place? The biggest event in the Old Testament. What's the biggest thing in the history of Israel, I should say?
Joseph being elevated to...
Joseph being elevated is a big one. Yes.
The
Which you
Exodus.
remembered in Egypt. Something even bigger than 400 years later.
The Exodus.
The Exodus. And remember who knew about that? Remember Rahab the prostitute in Jericho. It's 40 years before that you have the Exodus, but what she do? She hides those spies. Why? Because we heard about her God and what he did to the Egyptians. All right? So what you see is God is making himself known through the nation of Israel. Continue.
And she gave the king 120 talents of gold, large quantities of spices and precious stones. Never again were so many spices brought in as those the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon.
It's estimated that's the amount of wealth that she helped bring in. Next. Iron ships brought gold from Ophir, and from there they brought great carpets of almond wood and precious stones. The king used the olive wood to make supports for the temple of the Lord, and for the royal palace to make harps and lyres and musicians. So much almond wood has never been afforded and seen since that day. We're not sure what this is, but a lot of people think it's red sandalwood. And where do you get that from? Show the picture. India. India. Very, very beautiful wood. Okay, next. King Solomon gave Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for besides what he had given her out of his royal bounty. Then she left and returned with her retinue to her own country. Okay? Sheba. The question is, where is Sheba? Most scholars would believe it is modern day Yemen, which is kind of infamous, and Sheba is similar to Saba, which is the capital of Yemen. Okay? Now, do you know anything about Yemen? What it's like? Here it's on the Arabian Peninsula, but if you notice, it is in a mountainous area. That capital, Saba, is up several thousand feet, so it's not as brutally hot as it is in Saudi Arabia. And the mountains mean that you have areas down in the valleys, where even though everything else is totally barren, you have some rain and runoff so that you can actually do agriculture. So it was an important kingdom in the ancient world. Today is bad news. What's the big problem in Yemen? Big problem in Yemen is the men of Yemen are a mess. Because what do the men in Yemen do? There is a plant called khat. And you chew on it, it gives you a high. So what men in Yemen do is every afternoon they just sit around the true God. I know about this because it is spilled over across the Red Sea to Ethiopia. And Tibet talks about how it could be a problem in Ethiopia as well. But can you imagine that? Men every day just sit around chewing and getting a buzz that way.
I think that's what's going on in Colorado. Yeah,
And maybe, I don't know. That I can't tell you. Okay? There is an allusion to this Mukarib, which is the capital of it, and again, why it's seen as being the area where Sheba is in terms of Yemen. Continue. And there's the Temple of Awam, which has been found there in that area in Yemen. This is believed to maybe have been where the Queen of Sheba was. Next. The Queen of the South, well, she's from that south area, so again, implying that this would be the area where it is. Next. Okay? Now, a lot of people have traditionally seen Sheba as maybe in Ethiopia. A lot of talk that way, saying that's how Ethiopia came to know the Israelites, because if you go to Ethiopia, where did they claim the Ark of the Covenant went to? Ethiopia, like in the middle of Ethiopia. But the problem with that theory is that doesn't match any of the archaeological evidence, especially the stuff that seems to draw us more to Yemen as being the site of it. The other thing is, what is Ethiopia? We say Ethiopia, but it didn't say that in each one. Next. It's this Horn of Africa area somewhere around there, but it's most probably not on the African side, but the Asiatic side. You see the mountainous area there as well. Next. Okay. Here again, you got Ethiopia, and maybe people thinking that's maybe what it's being talked about. Now, if you look there, why do I put those two, Nigeria and Ethiopia? Any ideas? Look at the women.
In layer skin.
Yeah, and what else?
they look very much alike.
Do they?
No?
Well, their features are.
What are features are different?
No.
And you do not see this with Quebec, but you see it with Waukegan.
The nose, for one thing.
Yes, the nose of the Ethiopian is much more slender. The face is more slender. It's more rounded in the African. And that's because, really, Orkitu is a classical Ethiopian. Quebec is from the south, where they're more African. And he looks more African. He would look more like a person in Nigeria than a person in Ethiopia. There is kind of a mix in Ethiopia between the black African and the Middle Eastern. And because of that, people have often thought that talk in the Bible about the South, the Queen of the South, or Sheba, is a reference to Ethiopia. Continue. See, you have the tradition of the kings of Ethiopia descending from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Next. However, we know that there was no sign of any worship of the true God in Ethiopia until about the year 400, when Christianity, not Judaism, but Christianity came from the Egyptian Coptic church to Egypt, from Egypt, came there. The man, missionaries known as Frumentus. And that's where Ethiopian Christianity, Ethiopian worship of the true God came. There was developed from that some Jews as well, who, Jewish Ethiopians as well. It's a very small group. Okay? Ethiopia was always known as Abyssinia until the 20th century. And it was called only Ethiopia in the 20th century, especially when the appeals were made to drive out the fascist Italians out of it, because during Mussolini's reign, they conquered Ethiopia. At the beginning of World War II, they were kicked out. And in that, why would they appeal to Ethiopia rather than Abyssinia? Because you have these references to Ethiopia in the Bible, Queen of Sheba, what else especially? Who's the big Ethiopian in the Bible?
Well, the Ethiopian who met,
Philip.
right, and in the chariot.
Right, and people will say, tradition will say, that's talking about modern Ethiopia. No one called Ethiopia until the 20th century. It's Abyssinia. What was Ethiopia? Ethiopia was modern-day Sudan. Sudan, that's Ethiopia, or Kush was also called in the Old Testament. Okay, let's continue. Then some of the Pharisees and teachers of the law said to Jesus, "Teacher, we want to see a sign from you." He answered, "A wicked and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. Whereas Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the huge fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. No man will stand up in the judgment of this generation and condemn him. For they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and now something greater than Jonah is here. The Queen of the South will rise at the judgment of this generation and condemn him. For she came from the ends of the earth and listened to Solomon's wisdom, and now something greater than Solomon is here." All right, here you have this big thing with Solomon, the Queen of Sheba, this big hype. But what happens to Solomon's wealth? What happens to all that has been built up?
Invasions, and it gets all off.
Next frame. King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from many nations about which the Lord told the Israelites, "You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after the gods." Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wife turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. He followed Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. So Solomon did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He did not follow the Lord completely, as David his father had done. On a hill east of Jerusalem, Solomon built a high place with Chemosh, the detestable god of Moab, and Moloch, the detestable god of the Ammonites. There's a view of Chemosh, and that means destroyer, and that's the kind of god he was. Next. There's Moloch, and Moloch worship, which was involved in this child sacrifice. People, historians didn't believe this is no evidence of, until they find in Carthage, which is North Africa, Tunisia, signs of these tophets, where they would bury the ashes of these children who had been sacrificed. And they can make the connection because the Carthage was a colony of Phoenicia. And Phoenicia got the Canaanite religion. And so we see that connection and realize, hey, this is truly what happened, what the Bible talks about really did happen. Next. He did the same for all his foreign wives who burned incense and offered sacrifices to their gods. The Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he forbid Solomon to follow the gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly take the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates. Nevertheless, for the sake of David your father, I will not do it during your lifetime. I will tear it out of the hands of your son. Yet I will not tear the whole kingdom from him, but will give him one of the tribes of David, my servant, for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen." Okay? Why is David so important? Well, we don't have time with the scripture, but the idea is that God has decided that he is going to bring about the fulfillment of the plan through David. David wants to build a temple for the Lord. David says, "No, you're not going to do this. This is the lesson I always hear on Christmas Eve. I'm going to do building a house. I'm going to take from your house, from your dynasty, someone who will rule forever." And it's talking, of course, about Jesus. Let's look through that, Norm, that text. Why did Solomon have so many wives? Well, it's how they did treaties in those days. Next frame. See these three men? You know who they are? That's King George V of England, Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia. Great leaders of all those empires at the beginning of World War I. What did they share in common?
A grandma?
Who was their grandma?
I don't know.
Queen Victoria. They didn't call each other George or Wilhelm or Nicholas. It was Nicky, Willie, and George. They didn't call him George. What was his middle name they called it? But, they were cousins. That's how you did negotiation. The problem with this is he's introduced all this idolatry with it, and instead of trusting in God, he's trusting in his wisdom gives to him. And this is all part of, go ahead.
What?
Are you going to say something?
No, I just said, there she is.
Oh, yeah.
Victoria.
Right, exactly. And what you see happening is God purposely is bringing this about because he knows this is not the way he's really going to show forth his power and might. Not through the Exodus, not through this great nation, physical nation of Israel, but through whom? Through his son, Christ Jesus, who will do it not by military might or wealth or wisdom, all these things you see with Solomon, but how? Through the cross. Continue. So why did God allow the wealth and power? In the first place, so it would be lost, to show that doesn't going to work. And people realize, look at it, well, it didn't work under Solomon, it's not going to work under us, we need something else. Romans 11 says it, he causes them to stumble, the Jews, Israel, why? To make the Gentiles envious, and so that the Gentiles come to faith, and through the Gentiles, the gospel can go to the Jews. That's God's plan. Continue, is that it? Yeah. So the importance of the Solomon Queen of Sheba is show how God is building this all, but he is going to make it fail. All this stuff, because it's all preparing for the coming of Jesus. Okay. Thank you. We got a service going, so.
Very interesting.
Okay, thanks very much. And
I
next
always thought
is
she was
Elijah.
I don't know why.
Solomon was wise, but he was foolish.
Yes, he was. It's a difference between what's called knowledge and wisdom. You look at a top scientist, you can have knowledge. You want wisdom? Grandma.